Before you hear these words, before you recognize this voice, before you understand the question being asked, something extraordinary is already happening. You are having an experience. There is sound. There may be an image in front of you. There may be pressure beneath your body, air moving across your skin, or a thought passing quietly through your mind. And somehow, all of it is present to you. Not merely detected, not merely processed, experienced. There is something it feels like to be here. Something it feels like to be you. We call this consciousness. It is the most intimate fact of your existence, and perhaps the least understood. Everything you have ever known has appeared within consciousness. Every person you have loved, every place you have visited, every fear you have carried, every dream you have forgotten. Even your understanding of the universe, its stars, atoms, galaxies, and laws, has reached you through experience. You may believe, with good reason, that a world exists beyond your mind, but you have never encountered that world without consciousness. You have only encountered your experience of it. And this leads us toward a question so familiar that we rarely notice how strange it is. What is consciousness? Imagine that tomorrow morning you wake with every memory intact. You recognize your home. You remember your childhood. You know your name. You can speak, laugh, work, make decisions, and answer every question exactly as you would today. To everyone around you, nothing appears to have changed. But behind your eyes, there is no experience. No color, no sound, no pain, no inner voice, no feeling of existence. Your body continues, your brain continues, your behavior continues, but no one is home. Could such a being exist? And if it could, would anyone be able to tell? This imagined creature is sometimes called a philosophical zombie, not a monster, but a being physically and behaviorally identical to a conscious human with no inner experience at all. The thought experiment is controversial. Some philosophers believe such a creature is logically possible. Others argue that the idea falls apart once consciousness is properly understood. But the question exposes the mystery at the center of our inquiry. Why is there an inner world accompanying the activity of the brain? Why does anything feel like anything? A camera can detect light, a microphone can register sound, a thermostat can react to temperature. A computer can recognize a face, generate language, calculate probabilities, and respond to complex instructions. But detection is not necessarily experience. A camera does not obviously see the sunset it records. A microphone does not appear to hear the music passing through it. A machine may use the word pain without suffering. It may describe the color red without ever seeing red. So what is the difference between processing information and experiencing it? The human brain processes far more information than consciousness reveals. It regulates breathing, adjusts blood pressure, coordinates movement, interprets sensory signals, predicts what will happen next. Most of this occurs without deliberate awareness. Even sophisticated decisions can begin forming before we become conscious of making them. You may walk along a familiar route while thinking about something else, then suddenly realize that you remember almost nothing about the last several minutes. Your eyes continued to receive light. Your body avoided obstacles. Your brain maintained direction, yet much of the journey never became part of your conscious attention. The machinery continued operating backstage. Only a small portion reached the stage. Consciousness, then, cannot simply be the brain doing something complicated. The brain does many complicated things in darkness. The mystery begins when some of those processes become illuminated. Consider the color red. Physics can describe the electromagnetic radiation reflected by an object. Biology can explain how light interacts with the retina. Neuroscience can trace signals moving through the visual system and identify patterns of activity associated with color perception. But nowhere inside those descriptions do we find redness itself. We find wavelengths, cells, electrical activity, chemical transmission, information moving through a biological network. Yet the experience of red, the quality of it, the immediate presence of it, seems to belong to a different kind of description. The same is true of pain. Science can identify damaged tissue, nerve signals, brain activity, hormonal responses, and behavioral reactions. But the measurement is not the suffering. A brain scan may reveal that a person is in pain. It does not contain the pain itself. There is a difference between knowing every measurable fact about an experience and having that experience. This is the territory of what philosopher David Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness. The so-called easier problems are not easy in any ordinary sense. They include explaining how the brain identifies objects, directs attention, stores memories, controls behavior, and reports its internal states. These are enormous scientific challenges, but they concern mechanisms and functions. The hard problem asks something deeper. Why should any of those mechanisms be accompanied by subjective experience? Why should electrical activity in the brain produce the feeling of warmth, the sound of music, the presence of sorrow? Why is there someone for whom the activity matters? Some philosophers believe this question reveals a genuine gap in our understanding of nature. Others believe the gap is partly an illusion. Perhaps once we fully explain perception, attention, memory, emotion, self-modeling, and report, there will be nothing left to explain. Perhaps consciousness seems mysterious because the brain cannot observe its own internal construction process. It receives the finished experience without seeing how the experience was assembled. A person looking at a computer screen sees folders, icons, and windows. They do not see billions of electrical operations occurring underneath. The interface hides the machinery. Consciousness may do something similar. It gives us the result, not the construction. For centuries, questions about consciousness belonged mainly to philosophy. Today, they are also investigated in laboratories, hospitals, operating rooms, and brain imaging facilities. Modern neuroscience has established a deep relationship between consciousness and the physical brain. Alter the brain, and experience changes. Damage certain regions, and parts of awareness may disappear. Stimulate neural tissue, and a person may feel a sensation, remember a scene, perceive a flash of light, or experience movement that never occurred. Sleep changes the structure and contents of consciousness. Psychoactive substances can distort time, identity, perception, and emotion. Brain injury can leave someone outwardly unresponsive, while evidence suggests that some internal awareness may remain. General anesthesia is especially revealing because it allows researchers to alter consciousness reversibly. Yet unresponsiveness does not always mean that all experience has disappeared. Some anesthetized people may retain disconnected internal experiences, such as dreams, even when they are not consciously connected to the surrounding environment. This teaches us an important distinction. Consciousness is not one simple switch. A person may be awake but unaware, aware but unable to respond, unresponsive yet internally experiencing, conscious of the world but not of the self, conscious of a sensation but unable to remember it later. What we call consciousness may contain several dimensions: wakefulness, awareness, attention, memory, experience of the environment, experience of oneself. They interact, but they are not identical. This is why consciousness is so difficult to study. Scientists cannot measure another person's experience directly. They measure behavior, reports, electrical activity, blood flow, and patterns of communication within the brain. Then they attempt to infer what the person is experiencing. The experience itself remains private. You can tell me that you see blue. I can observe your brain while you say it. I can compare your neural activity with that of others, but I cannot enter your blue. Consciousness has an outside that science can observe and an inside available only to the experiencer. That does not make it supernatural. It makes it methodologically unusual. The observer and the object of observation are entangled. A conscious brain is using consciousness to investigate how consciousness emerges from the brain. It is a mirror attempting to see behind itself. Other theories begin from different directions. Higher order theories suggest that a mental state becomes conscious when the mind represents itself as being in that state. The brain may process an image without awareness. But when another level of the system registers, in some form, I am seeing this, the perception becomes conscious. Under this view, consciousness involves the mind monitoring or representing its own activity. A thought is not conscious merely because it occurs. It becomes conscious when the system knows, in some sense, that the thought is occurring. Other researchers emphasize recurrent processing. Signals in the brain do not simply travel in one direction, from the senses toward a final destination. They move forward, backward, and sideways through continuous loops. A visual signal may enter the brain rapidly, but conscious seeing may emerge only when that activity is sustained through recurrent interaction among neural regions. Still, another family of ideas treats the brain as a prediction machine. According to predictive processing approaches, the brain does not passively record the world. It continually generates models of what is likely to be present. Incoming sensory information then corrects those predictions. Perception becomes a negotiation between expectation and evidence. What you experience is not a flawless copy of external reality. It is the brain's best current model of what is causing its sensory signals. The world constrains the model, but the brain constructs the experience. This becomes obvious when perception fails. Optical illusions reveal shapes, motion, brightness, or depth that are not present as they appear. A familiar sound may seem clear only after someone tells you what words to expect. In darkness, a hanging coat may briefly become a person. The brain is not waiting for reality to explain itself. It is constantly guessing. Most of the time, those guesses are so effective that we mistake the model for the world itself. This does not mean reality is imaginary. It means experience is an interpretation shaped by reality. Light exists beyond us, but color as experienced is produced through the relationship between light, sensory systems, and the brain. Pressure waves move through the air, but music exists as experience. Molecules interact with receptors, but sweetness, bitterness, and fragrance emerge within consciousness. The world outside may contain structure. Consciousness turns that structure into a lived world. And that lived world is selective. Humans perceive only a narrow range of electromagnetic radiation. We hear only part of the possible spectrum of vibration. We remain unaware of most activity inside our own bodies. Reality contains far more information than consciousness could possibly display. So the brain filters, compresses, prioritizes. It gives the organism not everything that exists, but what is useful. In this sense, consciousness may resemble an interface. A computer interface does not show electrical currents or machine code. It shows icons, a folder, a button, a window. These symbols are not false. They are simplified representations designed for action. Perhaps conscious experience works in a similar way. We do not perceive reality exactly as it is in itself. We perceive a biologically useful model shaped by millions of years of survival. The red berry stands out. The moving shadow captures attention. The angry face becomes urgent. The cliff produces fear. Consciousness may not have evolved to reveal the full truth of reality. It may have evolved to help an organism remain alive within it. And yet the question returns. Why should a useful model be experienced? Why could evolution not produce an organism that behaves intelligently, integrates information, predicts danger, and protects itself without any inner light at all? Perhaps consciousness provides an advantage. It may allow flexible decisions when automatic routines fail. It may bring competing information into a shared arena. It may allow the organism to imagine possibilities, evaluate consequences, understand other minds, and revise its own behavior. But explaining what consciousness does is not necessarily the same as explaining why consciousness exists. The function may be clear while the experience remains mysterious. Then there is the one who seems to be having the experience, the self. Consciousness does not usually appear as anonymous information. It appears to belong to someone. There is a center, a witness, an I moving through time. You remember being younger. You imagine being older. You feel that the child in your memories and the person listening now are somehow the same being. But what exactly has remained the same? Your body has changed. Many of its cells have been replaced. Your beliefs have evolved. Memories have faded or been altered. Your personality may have shifted. Thoughts often arise before you choose them. Emotions appear without permission. The brain contains many specialized systems, sometimes cooperating and sometimes in conflict. Yet consciousness presents this changing collection as one continuous person. Where is that person located? Behind the eyes? Inside the head? Within the body? In memory? In the story you tell about yourself? When researchers examine the brain, they do not find a tiny observer watching an internal screen. There is no central room in which everything arrives and someone inside views it. That would only create another mystery. Who is watching inside the observer? Perhaps the self is not a permanent object. Perhaps it is a model, a continuously updated construction linking body, memory, attention, emotion, social identity, and expectation. The brain needs to distinguish the organism from its environment. It needs to know which body must be protected, which memories belong to this life, which actions were performed by this individual, which future consequences may affect it. A self-model organizes those tasks. It creates continuity across time. It turns scattered events into a story. But calling the self a construction does not make it meaningless. A melody is constructed from separate notes. There is no single note that contains the whole melody. Yet the melody is real. A wave is a pattern moving through water. No individual molecule travels exactly as the wave travels. Yet the wave is real. The self may be real in the same way, not as an unchanging substance, but as an organized process. You may not possess a permanent self. You may be the ongoing activity of creating one. Consciousness becomes even more difficult when we ask where it begins and ends. We assume that other human beings are conscious, but we never observe their consciousness directly. We infer it. Their bodies resemble ours. Their brains resemble ours. They speak about feelings. They avoid pain. They describe dreams. They respond to love and loss. Because they are like us, the inference feels secure. With animals, the boundaries become less obvious. A dog appears to feel fear and affection. A crow solves complex problems. An octopus explores, learns, and behaves with remarkable flexibility, despite having a nervous system organized very differently from ours. How much consciousness is required before there is genuine experience? Does a mouse feel pain as we do? Does an insect possess a minimal point of view? Is consciousness gradual, or does it appear only after a threshold is crossed? Our answers matter ethically. The wider the boundaries of consciousness, the wider the boundaries of possible suffering. And now humanity has created another challenge: artificial intelligence. Machines can produce language that seems reflective. They can discuss emotions, analyze images, solve problems, compose music, and imitate empathy. But intelligent behavior is not proof of consciousness. A system can generate the sentence, "I am afraid," because that sequence fits the context. The sentence alone does not establish that fear exists behind it. Language can be produced without feeling. At least we know that it can be produced through processes very different from those of a human brain. But we must also be careful with the opposite assumption. We cannot declare with certainty that consciousness belongs exclusively to biology simply because biological consciousness is the only form we currently understand. A future artificial system might develop internal structures that support experience, or it might imitate consciousness perfectly while remaining entirely empty. How would we distinguish the two? Behavior, architecture, memory, self-report, integrated information, the capacity to suffer? None of these provides a universally accepted test. The question of machine consciousness may force us to define a phenomenon that humanity has discussed for thousands of years without fully explaining, and the consequences will not be abstract. If an artificial system can experience, then creating, controlling, copying, or terminating it may carry moral weight. If it cannot experience, then mistaking sophisticated imitation for inner life may distort human judgment in equally dangerous ways. We need openness without gullibility, skepticism without arrogance. We should not assume that every fluent machine is conscious, nor should we assume that consciousness must always resemble us. Some thinkers believe consciousness will eventually be explained as an emergent property of organized matter. No individual water molecule is wet. Wetness emerges from interactions among many molecules. No single neuron may be conscious. Consciousness may emerge from the organized activity of the brain. This analogy is appealing, Complex systems often display properties absent from their individual components, but critics argue that emergence does not yet close the explanatory gap. The physical behavior of molecules allows us to understand liquidity. The physical behavior of neurons still does not obviously explain why there is a felt quality to experience. Others propose that consciousness may be more fundamental. Perhaps matter does not somehow produce experience from ingredients that contain nothing experiential. Perhaps basic reality includes properties from which both matter and consciousness emerge. One family of views, called panpsychism, suggests that extremely primitive forms of experience may be fundamental and widespread, while complex consciousness appears only when systems are organized in particular ways. This does not mean that rocks think. It does not mean that the universe has a human personality. It is an attempt to answer one question: how can experience arise from a reality that is entirely devoid of experience? But panpsychism creates another mystery. If basic components possess tiny, primitive experiential properties, how do they combine into the unified consciousness of a person? How do countless fragments become one point of view? This is known as the combination problem. No accepted solution exists. Life once appeared to require a mysterious vital force. Biology later showed how living systems could emerge from organized chemistry. Consciousness may follow the same path, or it may force a deeper revision of what we mean by matter. At present, honesty requires us to admit that we do not know. Possibility is not evidence. Mystery is not permission to believe anything. The unknown must remain open without becoming a hiding place for certainty. So what is consciousness? Is it information broadcast across the brain? A system integrated into an irreducible whole? The mind representing its own activity? Signals looping through recurrent networks? A predictive model of the world and the body? An emergent property of biological complexity? A fundamental feature of reality? Or a problem created by the limitations of a brain attempting to understand itself? Perhaps each theory captures part of the landscape. Perhaps several describe different dimensions of consciousness rather than competing for one final definition. Or perhaps the correct explanation has not yet been imagined. What we know is that consciousness is both powerful and fragile. It can create civilizations, symphonies, equations, religions, and machines. Yet it can be altered by a small chemical molecule. It can disappear in dreamless sleep, fragment through injury, narrow under fear, expand through attention, distort under illness, and return each morning with such familiarity that we barely notice the miracle. You awaken. A world appears, a body becomes yours, a past returns, a future opens, and somewhere within the activity of billions of cells, there is presence. Not merely information, not merely behavior, a point of view. For billions of years, as far as we know, stars formed without being seen. Galaxies collided without being heard. Planets moved through darkness without wonder. Then, on at least one small world, matter organized itself into life. Life developed nervous systems. Nervous systems built models of their surroundings. And at some unknown point in that history, the universe was no longer merely happening. It was being experienced. Light was seen, pain was felt, sound was heard. A creature became aware. Then awareness turned inward. The observer discovered itself, and consciousness began asking what consciousness is. Perhaps one day science will explain the process completely. Perhaps researchers will identify the necessary architecture, reproduce it, measure it, and predict exactly when experience appears. Perhaps the hard problem will dissolve because we were asking the question incorrectly. Or perhaps consciousness will reveal that our current picture of reality is incomplete. Either way, this mystery is not located in some distant galaxy. It is here, closer than your hands, closer than your breath, closer than every object you have ever touched. It is the space in which touching, breathing, thinking, and knowing become possible. We have mapped structures millions of light years away. We have split atoms, decoded genomes, built machines that generate language. Yet the greatest unexplored territory may still be the presence looking through your own eyes. Every scientific discovery has appeared within consciousness. Every philosophical argument, every equation, every work of art, Every doubt about consciousness has itself been a conscious event. It is the light by which every other question becomes visible. And still, we do not know what the light is. Perhaps consciousness is not simply another object within the universe. Perhaps it is the opening through which a universe becomes present to itself. For now, we stand at the boundary between knowledge and mystery. We know that consciousness is deeply connected to the brain. We know that it has structure. We know that it can be changed, disrupted, and studied. We know that wakefulness, attention, responsiveness, and experience are related, but not identical. We know enough to ask better questions, but not enough to close the case. So pause for a moment. Notice the sound reaching you. Notice the body that seems to be yours. Notice the next thought as it arrives. You did not know exactly what that thought would be before it appeared, and yet it appeared to someone. What is that presence? What is this invisible interior behind perception? What awakens each morning, gathers a world around itself, carries a name, remembers a past, imagines a future, and silently declares, "I am here"? What is consciousness? The search continues.